everyone, and welcome to the Caffeine podcast and videos. And today we're going to go through my dictionary again from 1914. And as you can see, you can just stop if you're interested in looking at the names. You can stop, and we're looking at Anglo-Saxon today. A member of the Anglo-Saxon race. So Anglo-Saxon was considered a race in and of itself. I suppose today we'd call it an ethnicity. Maybe, I don't know. One of the Teutonic population of Britain. So I wanted to know what Teutonic was because I'm not sure about that. And it is... The Teutons were an ancient northern European tribe mentioned by Roman authors. The Teutons are best known for their participation together with the Cimbri, which is Celtic, and other groups in the Cimbrian War with the Roman Republic. In the late 2nd century BC. Some generations later, Julius Caesar described them as Germanic people. And there is lots of history here about the Celtic, Germanic influences, which is interesting because my ancestors are both Celtic and Anglo-Saxon, and it's just interesting that it seems that they were fighting both fighting together the war against the Roman Republic, because that's not something that I've really ever learnt about. I learnt that the Anglo-Saxons settled in the UK, in England, against the will of the Celts, which is why I was so interested that I was both Anglo-Saxon and Celtic. I found that bizarre, but now I'm reading here that they were fighting together against the Roman Republic. Which I had initially thought, and then I'd learnt that no, the Romans just didn't have enough money or something like that. So there seems to be so many different ideas about what's going on. So anyway, we'll go back to here. The Teutonic population of Britain, an official native name of the subjects of Alfred after he subdued the Angles. In Latin, Angli. Okay. Alfred. Revived in the 17th century to distinguish the Saxons of England from the Old Saxons of the continent. That's even more interesting because it sounds like there's been an attempt in the 17th century to bind together England and Europe, as has happened recently with the EU and the not the Anglo-Saxons, or maybe it is the Anglo-Saxons saying no, we'd rather not. The entire English race, wherever found, is as in Europe, the United States, India, Australasia, ancient as well as modern. The Anglo-Saxon language, the language of the Anglo-Saxons, at first called English, afterward when Old English was mixed with Norman, called Saxon, and finally Anglo-Saxon in distinction from Old Saxon. We will be looking into Norman a bit later on this video. The dialect earliest cultivated was the Anglian. The surviving literature is almost all in West Saxon, which is Mercian. Modern English is from Mercian, the dialect of the early Saxons in Wessex, Essex, Sussex, Middlesex, in distinction from Northumbria, Mercian and Kentish, a late and rare grammatical use. Right, okay. Indo-European language, several eminent English scholars. Old English, and Old English is what it generally means. Anglo-Saxondom, the domain of the Anglo-Saxons or of their descendants as Great Britain and North America, the Anglo-Saxons collectively. So it seems like the Anglo-Saxons are fully over there in America as well, and in Australia. A purely Anglo-Saxon phrase, the quality of being Anglo-Saxon. So that's Anglo-Saxonism. It gets more interesting because we start to find a little bit more on the sort of emotions surrounding Anglo-Saxons in 1914. So you have all these Anglo-American, Anglo-Asian, Anglo-Chinese, Anglo-Japanese, Anglo-Catholic. That's interesting. Anglo-Catholicism, Anglo-Danish, Irish, Norman, Anglo-Man, an American an Anglo-maniac, an American citizen who favours English interests. Oh, okay, so that would be round about the Civil Wars, wouldn't it, in America? Ah, very interesting. So Anglo means English, I think. It just, you know, I suppose the aristocracy and the kings and queens, and I gotta say I'm not so keen on that idea. Mania for, so Anglo-mania, and a mania for English ways, over fondness for or imitation of things English by a person not English. So that would probably be the Americans who took the side of the English. Anglophile, because this is an American dictionary as well. Anglophile, having love for England or what is English, a lover of England or what is English. Anglophobe, one who hates or distrusts England or what it is. And Anglophobia as well down there. So I decided to look at the Normans as well to see if there was Norman phobia, because I'm interested in why the Normans seem to get away with all that. They seem to have a hold on all of the history, all of the achievements. Everything that's been achieved has been achieved only by the Normans, because the Anglo-Saxons, as I understood, lived in mud huts. I mean, I know that's not true because they have Anglo-Saxon buildings and architecture and what they call churches. So history seems very, very muddled and contradictory to me. So there is Normanic. I want to see if there's anything you know, about Normanphile and Normanphobe. So I had to go into the other, because there's two dictionary books, and this is the second one. Northern France, or to the Normans, Normandy. And then we got the Norman architecture, the form assumed by Romanesque architecture in Normandy, introduced thence into England before the conquest, and presumably the conquest is a Norman conquest of 1066, and practiced by the Normans in Normandy and England for over a century after the conquest. So the architecture was brought in and inspired by France and had a Romanesque build to it before the conquest, and it doesn't say how long before. And then practiced for a century after. I just find that really interesting because I'm interested in the buildings, the old world buildings that we see, which are Romanesque. And we keep seeing that they were built in the 1800s, which I just simply don't believe. But now they're saying that they were built before the conquest. And with that Romanesque sort of style. Okay, and practiced by the Normans in Normandy for over a century after the conquest, when it became merged little by little in Normandy into the Norman type of French pointed, and in England into the kindred but inferior early English style. The French and the oldest English examples differ, but little from those of other contemporaneous Romanesque styles, leading characteristics being the round arch and the barrel vault and massiveness of construction. And that's what interests me, the massiveness of the construction. Like, how did they do it with horse and cart? The later tendency of the style in England exhibits a certain degeneracy, as in the preference of wooden roofs to vaulting as the dogtooth, though many English buildings in this style are very rich and impressive in effect. Castles, almost innumerable, were built in this style in both Normandy and England, and I love castles, so I'll be going to visit them, and I'll be going to visit one very soon because I'm going to also do the aqueduct. The Norman conquest, under the Norman conquest, Norman English, that portion of the English language which dates back to the Norman period. The English language as spoken at that time. Norman Saxon, Norman French, belonging or relating to Normandy or the Normans. Dialect of the French spoken by the Norman conquerors of England, who derived it from the Latin spoken in Gaul. It changed first the spelling and then the accent and pronunciation of Anglo-Saxon, greatly enriching the language with terms derived from the arts, sciences, religion. So the sciences were brought in by the Normans. It hasn't said when that happened. It ceased to be the language of the law, so that would be the Anglo-Saxon, in 1362 under Edward III. And coalesced with the Anglo-Saxon element to form Anglo-Norman. Normanism, a custom form of speech or characteristic peculiar to the Normans. A liking for Norman customs and ideas. So if they've got Normanism, which is a liking, then they must have Norman phobe, but they don't. Which I feel is a little bit biased and makes me question some of this. Normanize, to give a Norman appearance or character to. His impartial brain, one lobe of which seems to have been Normanly refined, and the other Saxonly sagacious. Shakespeare. I do feel that Shakespeare and probably Charles Dickens were propagandists. A native of Normandy. Okay. So we've got quite a bit on Normans, but way more on the Anglo-Saxons in this. And you don't really have Norman phobes, but you do have Anglophiles. But then that might be about the Civil War, or the allyship between England and America that's always been there. It could be interpreted in many different ways, really. And I just grabbed all these words because I thought surely they're going to have Norman phobe, but they didn't. And that's just a blurry version of it. So I was interested in what it was all saying. I'm so interested in the Anglo-Saxons and the Normans from a English or British perspective, and it's interesting here that they've got the image of a helmet, whereas when I did the A to Z of the Old World and I did Armour, there wasn't any armour in the Anglo-Saxon era. That only came about from 1066 onwards, when wars started becoming abundant. So it's interesting that they've drawn, put an image of a helmet. So there were some other things which Anglo-Saxonism in the 19th century, which my understanding of this came from Thomas Hardy. I was watching the Madding Crowd, Far From the Madding Crowd, the old movie from the 60s, I think it was, not the recent version. And I was just looking into Far From the Madding Crowd, and I was looking into Thomas Hardy. And there just seemed to be this sort of revival in England and America in the 1800s for Anglo-Saxonism. And it seems to be that it was a cultural belief system developed by British and American intellectuals, politicians and academics in the 19th century. So I'm beginning to think now that the Anglophile and Anglophobe is more about this, because this is written in 1914. So I think it's more to do with this. And racialized Anglo-Saxonism contained both competing and intersecting doctrines, such as Victorian era, Old Northernism, and the Teutonic germ theory. Did I? Oh, this is an interesting one, germ theory, but I won't be talking about this at the moment. Which is relied upon in appropriating Germanic cultural and racial origins of the Anglo-Saxon race, which they've put in quotation marks there. Now, I would say that, if there's different groups who believe that they are a race, then, who are these outsiders to say that they're not? Predominantly a product of certain Anglo-American societies and societies of the era. So Thomas Hardy was one of them, and there's quite a few old classical writers from Britain who were Anglo-Saxonists, and then they sort of betrayed, they seem to, there's something about Godwin Smith in one of these, which I've got to find. There we go. Anglophobia. Hatred or dread of England or of what is English. There are practical reasons for allying Anglophobia. Godwin Smith, North American Review. And he was a British historian over in Canada as well. And I think the practical reasons may have been more personal reasons, because it shows that he actually changes his mind later on and becomes Anglo-Saxonist. But it's very interesting that all of this is coming up in an anti-Semitism. Because when I looked into the money, the Normans brought across the Jews, who then changed the tally stick system over to a monetary system, and became very rich from it. So they absolutely changed the monetary system in England, which is a huge change. He also believed that Islamic oppression of non-Jews was for economic factors. I mean, I can agree with some of these people. What they claim back in the 1800s and the 1900s still applies today. I would even say that the Anglo-Saxonism is still going on today, because there's a hatred and an anger towards white people. This guy, just look at this guy, what he has to say about what I would call Anglo-Saxonism, or what he calls something else.
99% of the meetings I go to, I'm the only non-white person in the room. But why are we so...
I'll just add, this is a Scottish MP. He's in Scotland, and Scotland is a white country, and he seems to have an issue with being in a white country and it being led by white people. It's really fascinating, because I don't quite understand his mindset here, but I'll leave it to play.
I'm surprised when the most senior positions in Scotland are filled almost exclusively by those who are white. Take my portfolio alone. The Lord President, white. The Lord Justice Clerk, white. Every High Court judge, white. The Lord Advocate, white. The Solicitor General, white. The Chief Constable, white. Every Deputy Chief Constable, white. Every Assistant Chief Constable, white. The Head of the Law Society, white. The Head of the Faculty of Advocates, white. Every Prison Governor, white. And not just Justice. The Chief Medical Officer, white. The Chief Nursing Officer, white. The Chief Veterinary Officer, white. The Chief Social Work Advisor, white. Almost every trade union in this country headed by people who are white.
And just a reminder, this is a man who's an MP in Scotland, and if you didn't know, Scotland is a white country.
In the Scottish Government, every Director General is white. Every chair of every public body is white. That is not good enough.
So I just find it really interesting that this sort of, what we now call sort of a BLM anti-white sort of attitude that's going on right now, where we've got to be multicultural and everything, seems to be the same thing that they've had in history, and there's just this whole Anglo-Saxonism, and people went back to, because they also had a revival of Christianity at that same stage, because all these churches got built in and chapels got built in Wales. I know that they did, and they just went through a Welsh singing and hymn revival, and I just see this happening again, coming up soon in the future. I think there's going to be a revival, and then it's all going to become all liberalised again. And it's interesting how Godwin is considered a liberal, but he was very much against, and he was considered a liberal, but he was against women voting and all sorts of things, which we definitely wouldn't call liberal, but in those days he really was. And then there was Thomas Hardy, who was very much against marriage, or the sort of institute of marriage. And again, I would say that was very liberal in those days, but and today as well. And it's just very interesting, all these people. And then Thomas Hardy, I was watching Far From the Madding Crowd because of his because of my interest in Anglo-Saxon. So yeah, I'll put all of these. Obviously, I can't put the images from the dictionary up, but you can press pause and take a screenshot if you wish. But yeah, it's fascinating. Oh, let's have a look at this. Teutonic germ theory. Many historians and political scientists in Britain supported it in the 19th century. The theory supposed that American and British democracy and institutions had their roots in Teutonic peoples, and that Germanic tribes had spread this germ with their race from ancient Germany to England and on to North America. So I wonder, with them going to war against Germany, that must have been a very traumatic experience for the Anglo-Saxonism going on in the 19th century. It must have been quite a psyop, like so traumatic, to go and slaughter the Germans after what we're told that the Germans did. However, in my law degree, we're not told that it's about that. We are taught that it was an ideological war, and I think that it was an ideological war, but it was it would have had further effects on the sort of further traumas on the Anglo-Saxonism which was rising. And I feel right now that there's a rising belief in sort of Christianity and a hope in Christianity at the moment from the church's teachings. And there's this whole thing with Israel and Palestine right now. And I suspect that is to help enable the trauma of towards those Christians who are followers of the church and the church teachings. I'm a Christian, but I don't follow the church or their teachings. Isn't it very fascinating? I didn't know any of this stuff. I am so enjoying this dictionary because it's really helping me look into all sorts of different things. Norman and Celtic, right? Okay, so we've just learnt about the Teutonic and Celtic. I think that was in there somewhere. Anglo-Saxon settlement. Oh, I was looking for fiction writers. I was looking for Thomas Hardy. I forgot his name. No. So these are the Teutons. And yeah, in here it talks about how they both fought together, presumably, against the Roman Republic. Yeah. And that was in the late 2nd century BC. Yeah, so it's really interesting. I like looking into all these sorts of things. I think an Anglo-Saxonism is interesting because of the revival, and I do feel that there's going to be a new revival on Anglo-Saxonism. And there is one going on. And yeah, they believe that their germ, so that's a new germ theory, which I have never heard about. In the 1890s, under the influence of Frederick Jackson Turner, Wilson abandoned the germ theory in favour of a frontier model of the sources of American democracy. Oh dear, and what's American democracy brought but lots of wars? So these people that might be what this was. So Anglo-Saxonism is actually American democracy of today, which is just wars and more wars. It's just a racket, really. Interesting. Mythology and religions. Anglo-Saxonism was largely aligned with Protestantism. Oh, I can't get my words out. Perceiving Catholics as outsiders, which is why presumably they are very anti-Europe. And was orientated as an ideology in opposition to other races such as the Celts of Ireland and Latins of Spain. And that will be why the Celts of Ireland would have been forced into slavery, presumably. A strong Norse element in Teutonism and Anglo-Saxonism. Well, I know that I am mixed Celtic and Anglo-Saxon. And I just wanted to look into all of this history around them, because there's obviously a long-standing history. And I will be going into Medusa and all of those sorts of things, and the wizardry going on in Celtic history, because there was a lot of that, and that's in my history, my own history, so I'd like to look into all of that as well. Merlin as well, and also the Pied Piper and things like that, but these are a long way ahead. Right, political aims, expansion. American Anglo-Saxonism was a growing sense that the Anglo-Saxon race had to expand into surrounding territories, which would be kind of what you would have seen with Hitler expanding. This particularly expressed itself in the ideology of manifest destiny, which claimed the US had a right to expand across North America. I'd like to look at this. Manifest destiny was a phrase that represented the belief in the 19th century that American settlers were destined to expand westward across North America. Hang on. I thought that there was that war. Hang on. And this belief was both obvious, manifest, and certain. The belief was rooted in American exceptionalism and romantic nationalism, implying the spread of the republican form of governance. Dear me. Manifest destiny remained heavily divisive in politics, causing constant conflict with regards to slavery in these new territories. So I'm getting so many different mind-bending lessons from all of this, because I have understood that Armour wasn't in existence till after 1066. The Anglo-Saxons were just mud hut building societies. Then the Norman conquest brought about a change with money. In 1066, it also brought about lots and lots of armies and everything, but all the blame seems to be placed on the Anglo-Saxons, which from my research were a peaceful society. And then it's as if people were going back to their roots of Anglo-Saxonism, but then there were sort of leaders. You know how we get leaders of these different alternative groups and they just pop up from nowhere and they just suddenly become that group? Like Russell Brand, he became a conspiracy theorist and now he's become a Catholic, and he seems to be placed a placeholder to lead the crowd and to sort of they're there so that history can be written about them and how they influenced history, and just to place blame on an outlook. So was it that the people wanted to go back to their simplistic ways of Anglo-Saxonism, and then Anglo-Saxonism was used as this sort of expansion for wars? But from my understanding, the Anglo-Saxons didn't bring about wars against people, but the Normans obviously did. But for some reason the Normans seem to be kind of this veil, and this is why I'm hidden behind a veil, and it's all the blame is placed on the Anglo-Saxons. And this is why I'm so intrigued by the Norman conquest and the idea of the Satan's season, because I believe that Satan's season is 1,000 years, and I think it started in 1066 when I believe that all the deception started. So that was a really interesting one. I really enjoyed doing that one. I always enjoy doing them, but this is particularly interesting and mind-bending for me. I have so much to contemplate now, but I'm glad that the confusion continues, because it means that my mind's active and my brain is working. So it's always a good thing when you're confused, I think. We're going to be doing architecture and probably the aqueduct. We might do them two separate, or I might do them as one combined, because this is a long one at 40 minutes or even longer. Okay, well, I'll leave it there. Please like, subscribe, comment and share if you find all of this stuff interesting, and I hope there's more for you to look into as well if you liked this one. And then I'll see you again soon. Goodbye.